As I said in the previous video, some verbs don't use avoir to form the passé composé, rather they use etre. So now this video, we're going to be looking at the passé composé with etre. So again, some verbs don't use avoir to form the passé composé, they use etre. There are about 16 or so of these verbs in addition to the reflexive verbs. The 16 verbs can be remembered using the mnemonic device Dr. and Mrs. Vandertramp, which I'll give you a handout on this later this week. And the reflexive verbs you don't really have to worry about till next year because you don't do them this year. But there are only 5 that you are actually required to know this year, and it's the 5 verbs that you've actually learned in the present tense. The rest of them you haven't learned in the present tense. These verbs, by the way, they're part of the explanation as to why they use etre is it's intransitive verbs, verbs that don't take a direct object. Don't worry about that for now, but these verbs must be memorized. You have to recognize that these 5 verbs use etre, they don't use avoir. When we form these, the passé composé of these verbs, we use the present tense of etre, and we use the past participles. The ER verbs follow the same rules you learned before. You take off the ER and you add the E accent aigu. However, the verb venir has actually an irregular past participle. It's venu. Okay? So, let's try to form the passé composé of a verb like arriver. So again, je suis arrivé. Tu es arrivé. Il est arrivé. Elle est arrivée. Nous sommes arrivés. Vous êtes arrivés. Ils sont arrivés. Elles sont arrivées. Now, with the être verbs, there's one slight difference, and that is that with the past participles, there's a certain, you have to have agreement, just like the adjective agreement. So, if I'm talking about a girl, I have to say elle est arrivée, add the extra E. For ils sont, I have to add S because it's plural. For elles sont, I have to add an E feminine and S plural. For tu, if you're talking to a female, you would add an E. If you're talking about yourself and you're female, add an E. Otherwise, you don't have to add these. For nous, if you're talking about a group of girls, you'd have to add an E. It's in parentheses because you don't always have to do this. The S will not be in parentheses because you have to always add an S because nous is always plural. For vous, it can be singular, it can be plural, it can be masculine, it can be feminine, so you have all of these options. And again, there's this agreement between the past participle with the subject of the sentence. It's similar to adjective agreement. It doesn't happen with the avoir verbs, only with the être verbs. It's one little step that you have to remember to do with these avoir verbs. With these être verbs. So right now, we're done. We will talk more about this in class. Au revoir. Bonne journée.